The house stood like a monument to a life many would envy, a sprawling estate nestled in the hills, far enough from the city to feel serene but close enough to remind its inhabitants of their wealth and status. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting shadows over the manicured lawn and stone fountains that dotted the property. The windows of the house, large and glittering, reflected the fading light, giving the place a polished, almost sterile feel. Inside, the soft hum of a classical piano piece drifted through the open doors of a study where an older man sat at a desk. His name was Matthew Hale. A man of stature, Matthew's salt and pepper hair and sharp, well-maintained appearance gave the impression of a man who commanded respect, a man whose success had been hard-earned and well-deserved. He was a self-made businessman, owner of a thriving tech firm that had placed him in the top tier of the financial elite. His wealth afforded him a life few could imagine: luxury cars, exotic vacations, a private jet, and a home that looked like it had been designed from the pages of a magazine. Yet behind the polished exterior, something was missing. The room was quiet, save for the faint tapping of keys on his laptop as he reviewed the latest company projections. Matthew wasn't entirely focused on the numbers. His thoughts were elsewhere. His wife, Anna, had been distant lately, and it gnawed at him. They'd been married for over a decade, their union one that had always seemed built on mutual respect and love. But something was off. He could feel it in the silence between them, in the way she looked past him during conversations, in the way she spent more and more time away from home. The house, for all its grandeur, felt emptier by the day. At the same time, Anna had been running on autopilot for months. She walked through the halls of their home as if it were a place she had to inhabit, rather than one she wanted to be in. Her life was a constant juggling act between appearances, maintaining her role as the beautiful, dutiful wife of a successful man, and the quiet dissatisfaction that had begun to settle deep within her. Her eyes had lost the sparkle they once held, replaced with a cool distance that even her friends had started to notice. No longer did she laugh at Matthew's jokes, or plan little surprises to bring back the romance that once defined their relationship. She had grown tired of the routine. Anna didn't want to admit it, but she had been restless for a long time. There was a hollowness to her life, one that no amount of material wealth could fill. She had become a stranger to herself, playing a role she no longer had the energy to sustain. Her days were filled with charity events, yoga classes, and designer shopping sprees, but none of it brought her joy. All she wanted was something real, something that made her feel alive. Then she met Ethan. Ethan was younger than Matthew, a man of contrasts. Where Matthew was meticulous and reserved, Ethan was spontaneous and free-spirited. They met at a gallery opening in the city, and from the moment their eyes met across the crowded room, there was an undeniable connection. It wasn't love, not at first, but it was something more than infatuation, something Anna hadn't felt in years. Ethan made her laugh, made her feel like a woman again, not just a trophy wife on display. What started as a harmless flirtation, a few stolen glances and flirtatious messages, quickly spiraled into an affair that consumed Anna in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't the passion that had been missing from her marriage, though there was plenty of that. No, it was the emotional intimacy, the vulnerability of being seen for who she truly was, not just who she was expected to be. Anna's affair with Ethan became her secret escape, a world where she could be herself, free of the constraints that came with her marriage to Matthew. She found herself looking forward to their stolen moments more than anything else in her life. Yet even in the throes of passion, she couldn't completely silence the voice in her head that whispered of betrayal. Still, she convinced herself it was just a phase. She loved Matthew. She had to, didn't she? He had given her everything she could have ever wanted. But love, like wealth, could be a complicated thing, and love, when tainted by neglect, could fade faster than anyone realized. On the night everything changed, the house felt strangely still. It was an evening like any other, or so it seemed. Matthew was at his desk, working late into the night as usual, and Anna was getting ready for a charity gala, one of those events that required her to look perfect, to be the perfect wife. But she wasn't thinking about the event. She was distracted, uneasy. Her phone buzzed on the vanity, and she glanced at the screen. It was Ethan. A message. She paused for a moment, her heart racing. What had once been a thrilling secret exchange had started to feel like a tether pulling her further and further from her life with Matthew. The guilt that had simmered in her stomach now bubbled to the surface. She quickly tapped the message away, returning her focus to the task at hand. But the voice in her head wouldn't stop. This wasn't just an affair. It was the beginning of something she might not be able to walk away from. Downstairs, Matthew's thoughts were turning darker, though he hadn't yet realized it. He had noticed the little things, the way Anna had started slipping away from him, the way her eyes had grown colder. But he hadn't wanted to believe it. To entertain the idea that his wife was no longer the woman he married felt impossible. Yet, deep down, he knew. He could feel it in the air between them, in the silence that had become too loud to ignore. His hands hovered over the keyboard, his mind miles away from the numbers in front of him. He'd seen the texts, found the lipstick on the collar of her coat, and the strange, guilty looks when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Something was happening, something he couldn't put into words, but it was enough to make him anxious, enough to make him wonder what he had missed. Anna's indifference to their life together had begun to feel like a ticking time bomb, and Matthew was beginning to question how much longer their world could stay intact. The cracks were forming, subtle at first, small, quiet fissures that only the most observant would notice. But like an earthquake building beneath the surface, it was only a matter of time before the ground beneath them shattered, and their world came crashing down. The perfect life they had built together was unraveling, and neither of them could stop it. The stage was set. Weeks passed since Anna's affair with Ethan began, and the distance between Anna and Matthew has only grown. On the surface, they continue their daily routines, public appearances, social gatherings, and professional commitments. But beneath it all, an undeniable tension festers. Their marriage, once a source of pride, now feels like a performance. Matthew's obsession with the affair. Matthew can no longer ignore the subtle signs that something is wrong. The coldness in Anna's demeanor, her increasing emotional detachment, her nights out without explanation. It all points to one thing. Though he has yet to confront her directly, he becomes consumed by jealousy and suspicion. He begins following her more closely, watching her interactions, even going as far as installing tracking software on her phone. Anna's guilt over the affair starts to eat away at her. She can't keep up the charade much longer. The affair, which once felt like a breath of fresh air, now feels like an albatross around her neck. She's torn between her emotional attachment to Ethan and the knowledge that she's destroying everything she's built with Matthew. Her attempts to balance both worlds, her life with Ethan and the life she shares with Matthew, become increasingly exhausting and unmanageable. Matthew's growing desperation. One evening, Matthew comes across a text on Anna's phone, an innocent exchange between her and Ethan, but it's enough to send him over the edge. His mind races with thoughts of betrayal and humiliation. He confronts Anna, his anger simmering beneath the surface. Anna tries to maintain her composure, but the confrontation turns into a shouting match. Matthew demands to know the truth, accusing her of infidelity. Anna denies everything at first, claiming that it's nothing more than a misunderstanding. But deep down, she knows the lies are growing harder to maintain. She becomes defensive, denying any emotional connection with Ethan while convincing herself that Matthew's accusations are baseless paranoia. Yet the cracks in her facade begin to show. The guilt continues to weigh heavily on her, and her defenses start to crumble under the pressure. Matthew's manipulation. Matthew's temper flares, but he knows that simply accusing Anna won't work. Instead, he begins to manipulate the situation, playing on her fears and insecurities. He implies that their marriage is on the verge of falling apart because of her, using her own guilt against her. He hints at the consequences of her actions, whether that means financial ruin or public humiliation. His words become sharp, calculated, designed to make her feel trapped in her own lies. Matthew is no longer just hurt. He's seeking control. He knows that he can't undo the damage Anna has caused, but he can make her suffer. He begins isolating her more and more, keeping her from friends and family, subtly manipulating her emotional state so that she feels powerless to escape his control. The emotional abuse begins to spiral. Matthew's affection one moment, followed by cold indifference the next. Anna feels like she's drowning in a relationship she no longer recognizes. As a wealthy couple living in the public eye, Anna and Matthew's every move is scrutinized by those around them. Charity events, business meetings, and social gatherings force them to keep up the appearance of the perfect marriage, even as the cracks widen. Matthew, always concerned with his image, demands that Anna attend public events with him, pushing her to pretend everything is fine when she's falling apart inside. Anna's role as the dutiful wife begins to feel suffocating. She is expected to embody perfection at all times, beautiful, composed, a constant symbol of success and luxury. The image of the perfect couple is everything, and yet she feels like a puppet, performing for an audience that doesn't care about the cracks in her soul. The more she succumbs to societal expectations, the more her sense of self disintegrates. Anna and Matthew's marriage begins to disintegrate. There's another undercurrent of tension that neither of them wants to acknowledge: financial strain. Despite their wealth, Matthew's business ventures have started to slow, and the lavish lifestyle they've grown accustomed to is at risk. The mounting pressure of maintaining their status and image weighs heavily on both of them. For Anna, the thought of losing the financial security she's relied on for years is terrifying. For Matthew, the thought of failure is unacceptable, and his obsession with control intensifies as he tries to keep his empire intact. As the tension mounts, Anna begins to secretly explore her own options. She starts looking into ways to secure her financial future in case the worst happens. She suspects Matthew may not be as forgiving as she hopes. She sneaks behind his back, consulting a lawyer about divorce options. But the more she contemplates her future outside of Matthew's influence, the more she feels a sense of dread. She realizes that, regardless of how she tries to escape, Matthew's grip on her life is suffocating. Anna's deep-seated need for affection and validation stems from her tumultuous childhood. Raised in a family where love was conditional and success was paramount, Anna learned early on to use her beauty and charm to gain attention. She was never truly loved for who she was, only for what she represented. This early emotional neglect shaped her relationships, making her susceptible to the flattery of a man like Ethan. Her affair wasn't just about passion. It was a desperate attempt to fill a void left by years of emotional abandonment. However, the affair quickly spirals into something more dangerous, as Anna becomes increasingly dependent on Ethan's approval. Matthew's background, too, has shaped him into a man driven by control and success. He grew up in a world where failure wasn't an option, where emotions were buried in favor of ambition and achievement. His own childhood taught him that love could be bought, manipulated, and molded into something that served him. This mindset, coupled with his growing paranoia and resentment over Anna's betrayal, drives him to seek control in every aspect of their relationship. His sense of superiority grows, and his need to punish Anna for her infidelity becomes all-consuming. His mental state deteriorates as he begins to view Anna not as a partner, but as a pawn in a game he must win. Ethan, too, has his own hidden motivations. While he genuinely cares for Anna, his involvement in the affair is not without ulterior motives. He's well aware of Anna's wealth and the power her connection to Matthew affords her. Though he tells Anna he loves her, there's a part of him that sees her as a means to an end, an opportunity to escape his own stagnant life. As Anna becomes more emotionally entangled with him, Ethan's intentions become murkier. He's not the romantic savior Anna believes him to be, and his involvement in their lives only complicates the situation further. Matthew's obsessive surveillance of Anna intensifies. He follows her, tracks her every move, and confronts her at the slightest provocation. His anger turns into a volatile mix of jealousy, rage, and fear. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Matthew storms out of the house, swearing that Anna will regret everything. As he drives aimlessly through the night, the weight of his emotions threatens to consume him. For Anna, the threat of Matthew's rage feels imminent. She begins to wonder if Matthew is capable of something far more dangerous than emotional manipulation. Ethan, ever the smooth talker, tries to reassure her that everything will be fine, that they'll find a way out. But the cracks are too wide now, and Anna starts to feel the walls closing in on her. The emotional and psychological battles between Anna, Matthew, and Ethan reach a breaking point. The delicate threads holding their lives together begin to snap, and it becomes clear that one of them is about to make a deadly decision. The tone shifts from a simmering tension to an atmosphere charged with foreboding and dread. Each character begins to grapple with their darker impulses, and the reality of their situation becomes undeniable. As external pressures mount, internal conflicts and personal grievances create a volatile mix, pushing the characters closer to the edge. The story builds toward an inevitable confrontation, each moment of tension and manipulation laying the groundwork for the crime that is about to unfold. It's a stormy night, the wind howling against the windows of the Anna Hale estate. The air is thick with tension, and the house, usually an oasis of comfort and luxury, now feels suffocating. Inside, the atmosphere is charged with unresolved emotions. Matthew has been drinking, his usual composure replaced by a jagged edge of anger. Anna, exhausted from the constant lies and pressure, has been pacing in the living room, wondering how much longer she can continue this dangerous game. Matthew enters the room with a cold, deliberate calmness, his eyes scanning Anna. His face is flushed from the alcohol, but his anger is sharper, more controlled than ever. He's already made up his mind. Tonight will be the night. The accusations he's been holding back for months will no longer stay buried. The confrontation that's been brewing will finally happen. Anna, sensing the brewing storm, attempts to talk her way out of it. She pleads, tears welling in her eyes, telling Matthew that she's sorry, that she never meant for things to go this far. She promises to end it with Ethan, to fix everything, but it's clear that Matthew isn't listening. His face is a mask of quiet fury, his emotions simmering just beneath the surface. His eyes, once full of love, are now full of something darker, something that scares Anna more than anything else. The conversation quickly spirals into a shouting match. Matthew's words grow sharper, filled with cutting accusations of betrayal, disrespect, and selfishness. He calls her every name in the book, dehumanizing her as if she's a traitor, a pawn in his personal game of retribution. The weight of his words crushes Anna, but it's his actions that send her over the edge. In a moment of blind rage, Matthew steps forward, grabbing Anna by the arm, shaking her violently. He screams at her, demanding she tell him everything, the truth, the details of the affair. Anna pulls away from him, fighting to free herself from his grip. Her heart races, fear flooding her veins as she realizes that this is no longer an argument. This is something darker, something irreversible. She grabs a nearby vase, her trembling hands gripping the cold porcelain for leverage. With a wild swing, she shatters it on the floor between them, hoping the noise will snap Matthew out of his fury. But instead of stopping, Matthew's rage intensifies. His face contorts with pure fury as he lunges at her, knocking the vase from her hands. In that moment, something inside him snaps completely. He grabs her again, this time with a force that feels like it will break her. Anna tries to scream, but Matthew's hand is over her mouth now, suffocating any sound she makes. She struggles beneath him, her heart pounding in her chest, as she realizes that he's not going to stop. She's trapped. In the chaos, Anna manages to break free for a split second. Her eyes dart around the room, searching for anything she can use to defend herself. She grabs a decorative knife from the kitchen counter, the blade sharp and cold in her hand. As Matthew lunges toward her again, driven by pure hatred, Anna's instincts take over. She stabs him once, the blade sinking deep into his side. It's a desperate act of self-preservation, but it's too late. The damage has already been done. The knife slips from her fingers as Matthew stumbles back, his face contorted in disbelief and pain. The room falls silent, save for the sound of Matthew's ragged breath and the slow-growing pool of blood spreading beneath him. The seconds after the stabbing feel like an eternity. Anna stands frozen, staring at Matthew, who is now crumpled on the floor, his blood staining the marble tiles beneath him. Her heart races, and her mind is a blur of confusion and terror. She didn't mean for this to happen. She never wanted it to go this far. But the reality of what she's just done crashes into her like a tidal wave. She's killed him. She's taken a life. And worse, she's taken the life of the man she once loved. Panic overtakes her. Her hands tremble as she drops to her knees beside him, blood on her hands. She tries to stop the bleeding, but it's no use. Matthew's life is slipping away with each passing second. She shakes him, calling his name, but he's unresponsive. The realization sets in. There's no going back. She has just committed the most unforgivable act, and now she has to live with the consequences. As he fades, Matthew's final thoughts are a tangled mess of betrayal, rage, and regret. He never imagined this would happen, never thought it would end like this. His mind flashes back to moments of their marriage, the early days when things were good, when they were happy. He remembers the woman he fell in love with, the woman he tried so desperately to keep, to control, to fix, the woman he believed was still his. But in his final moments, the truth hits him like a freight train. It was never truly about love. It was always about control. And now, it's too late. Anna stands over Matthew's body, frozen in disbelief. Her mind races, and the weight of what she's just done sinks in. The reality of the situation starts to crush her. She needs to do something. Anything. The consequences are too great. In a panic, she runs to the phone, but her hands shake so violently she can barely dial. She calls Ethan, her lover, her escape. The only person she thinks might help her through this nightmare. She begs him to come to the house, to help her figure out what to do next. Ethan arrives to find Anna hysterical, her hands still stained with Matthew's blood. He looks at the scene, his face going pale as he takes in the reality of what's happened. For a moment he says nothing. He's not sure how to react. His mind is racing. They both know what's at stake. Ethan helps Anna drag Matthew's body out of view, trying to minimize the damage, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. He urges her to stay calm, to think things through. But the panic is overwhelming. and Anna is slipping further into denial. In a haze of fear and adrenaline, Anna and Ethan work together to cover up the crime. They clean up the scene, moving Matthew's body into a less obvious position, trying to make the death look like something else. The room is a mess of broken glass, spilled blood, and frantic movements. Anna can barely think straight as she goes through the motions, her mind foggy with the weight of what she's done. But in the back of her mind, there's a growing sense of inevitability. The law will catch up to them, and she will never escape the consequences. As the adrenaline begins to wear off, a deep, unshakable guilt takes over Anna. Her thoughts spiral into self-loathing. She realizes, in the quiet moments after the chaos has died down, that her entire life has been shattered. There's no going back. The man she once loved is dead, and she is the one who killed him. The aftermath of the crime will haunt Anna for the rest of her life. Though she may try to convince herself that it was self-defense or a tragic accident, the truth is clear. She's taken a life, and no amount of rationalization will change that. The tone of the climax is charged with raw emotion, desperation, and chaos. The moment the crime occurs is quick, explosive, and emotionally devastating. The characters are thrust into a whirlwind of panic, guilt, and confusion, each one grappling with their own inner turmoil as the consequences of their actions become undeniable. The atmosphere is filled with fear and adrenaline, the intensity of the event heightening the emotional stakes. The aftermath is equally tense, as Anna and Ethan scramble to cover their tracks, yet are increasingly aware of the futility of their efforts. The crime has irrevocably altered the course of their lives. In the days following Matthew's death, Anna remains in a state of shock and denial. Her mind replays the events over and over, unable to reconcile the violent reality with the woman she once was. She tries to convince herself that it was self-defense, that Matthew was going to kill her, that she had no choice. But deep down, Anna knows that her actions were fueled by a mix of fear, anger, and desperation. Her guilt is overwhelming, but she refuses to let it consume her, at least not entirely. She focuses on the details of the cover-up, blocking out the emotional toll of her actions. The seconds after the stabbing feel like an eternity. Anna stands frozen, staring at Matthew, who is now crumpled on the floor, his blood staining the marble tiles beneath him. Her heart races, and her mind is a blur of confusion and terror. She didn't mean for this to happen. She never wanted it to go this far. But the reality of what she's just done crashes into her like a tidal wave. She's killed him. She's taken a life. And worse, she's taken the life of the man she once loved. Panic overtakes her. Her hands tremble as she drops to her knees beside him, blood on her hands. She tries to stop the bleeding, but it's no use. Matthew's life is slipping away with each passing second. She shakes him, calling his name, but he's unresponsive. The realization sets in. There's no going back. She has just committed the most unforgivable act, and now she has to live with the consequences. As he fades, Matthew's final thoughts are a tangled mess of betrayal, rage, and regret. He never imagined this would happen, never thought it would end like this. His mind flashes back to moments of their marriage, the early days when things were good, when they were happy. He remembers the woman he fell in love with, the woman he tried so desperately to keep, to control, to fix, the woman he believed was still his. But in his final moments, the truth hits him like a freight train. It was never truly about love. It was always about control. And now, it's too late. Anna stands over Matthew's body, frozen in disbelief. Her mind races, and the weight of what she's just done sinks in. The reality of the situation starts to crush her. She needs to do something, anything. The consequences are too great. In a panic, She runs to the phone, but her hands shake so violently she can barely dial. She calls Ethan, her lover, her escape, the only person she thinks might help her through this nightmare. She begs him to come to the house, to help her figure out what to do next. Ethan arrives to find Anna hysterical, her hands still stained with Matthew's blood. He looks at the scene, his face going pale as he takes in the reality of what's happened. For a moment, he says nothing. He's not sure how to react. His mind is racing. They both know what's at stake. Ethan helps Anna drag Matthew's body out of view, trying to minimize the damage, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. He urges her to stay calm, to think things through. But the panic is overwhelming, and Anna is slipping further into denial. In a haze of fear and adrenaline, Anna and Ethan work together to cover up the crime. They clean up the scene, moving Matthew's body into a less obvious position, trying to make the death look like something else. The room is a mess of broken glass, spilled blood, and frantic movements. Anna can barely think straight as she goes through the motions, her mind foggy with the weight of what she's done. But in the back of her mind, there's a growing sense of inevitability. The law will catch up to them, and she will never escape the consequences. As the adrenaline begins to wear off, a deep, unshakable guilt takes over Anna. Her thoughts spiral into self-loathing. She realizes, in the quiet moments after the chaos has died down, that her entire life has been shattered. There's no going back. The man she once loved is dead, and she is the one who killed him. The aftermath of the crime will haunt Anna for the rest of her life. Though she may try to convince herself that it was self-defense or a tragic accident, the truth is clear. She's taken a life, and no amount of rationalization will change that. The tone of the climax is charged with raw emotion, desperation, and chaos. The moment the crime occurs is quick, explosive, and emotionally devastating. The characters are thrust into a whirlwind of panic, guilt, and confusion, each one grappling with their own inner turmoil as the consequences of their actions become undeniable. The atmosphere is filled with fear and adrenaline, the intensity of the event heightening the emotional stakes. The aftermath is equally tense as Anna and Ethan scramble to cover their tracks, yet are increasingly aware of the futility of their efforts. The crime has irrevocably altered the course of their lives. Her guilt is overwhelming, but she refuses to let it consume her, at least not entirely. She focuses on the details of the cover-up, blocking out the emotional toll of her actions. Oh, guilt versus self-preservation. Anna vacillates between guilt and a desperate need to protect herself. In moments of clarity, she realizes the magnitude of her crime and the irreparable damage she's caused. Yet in the next breath, she's rationalizing her choices, convincing herself that she was justified. She keeps telling herself she had no choice, that Matthew's emotional abuse and control pushed her to this point. But every time she looks at the blood on her hands, she knows she's lying to herself. Oh, seeking solace in Ethan. Throughout the aftermath, Ethan becomes Anna's sole confidant. His presence soothes her in some ways, but there's a growing unease between them. Ethan, too, has his own guilt. Though he wasn't directly involved in the crime, he knows he played a part in pushing Anna toward it. Still, his desire to maintain the illusion of their life together overrides his morality. They both try to reassure each other that they've done what they needed to survive, but their relationship, already frail, begins to crack under the weight of their shared guilt. 2. The psychological toll on Anna. Unraveling mental state. As the days pass, Anna's emotional state deteriorates. The adrenaline that fueled the cover-up begins to fade, leaving behind a deep and gnawing emptiness. She struggles to sleep, haunted by nightmares of Matthew's final moments. The blood, the struggle. She feels like a stranger in her own body, disconnected from the person she used to be. The guilt manifests physically. She feels nauseous, weak, and on edge. Each time she looks in the mirror, she's confronted by the eyes of someone who isn't sure if they can recognize themselves anymore. Oh, isolation and loneliness. Anna withdraws from her friends and family, unable to face the world outside of the walls of her home. The guilt keeps her isolated, and the fear of being found out suffocates her. Her once gilded existence, filled with social engagements and public appearances, feels like a distant memory. She no longer feels comfortable in the luxury that surrounded her. Her home, once a symbol of success, now feels like a prison. The walls close in, and Anna begins to feel suffocated by the weight of the crime she can never undo. Oh, moments of clarity and regret. At times, when she's alone in her thoughts, the reality of what she's done crashes down on her. She sees flashes of Matthew, the man she once loved, the man she's killed. She realizes that no matter how much she justifies it to herself, no matter how much she tells herself it was for survival, it was a murder. The recognition is like a slap to the face, and for those few moments, Anna is raw and vulnerable, broken by the weight of her choices. Ethan's emotional struggle. A growing sense of fear. Ethan, while initially confident that they can pull off the cover-up, begins to feel the strain. The pressure of living in the aftermath, of constantly looking over his shoulder, starts to erode his confidence. He becomes paranoid, afraid that someone will discover the truth. His obsession with self-preservation grows, and his initial attempts to comfort Anna now feel hollow. He begins to regret his involvement in the affair and the role he played in her actions, but the desire to protect himself, along with his own dark ambitions, keeps him by her side. Paranoia and guilt. Ethan's mental state begins to unravel in parallel with Anna's. He constantly second-guesses every decision, worried that one wrong move will lead to their downfall. He becomes distant, withdrawn, his once charming personality now replaced by a cold, calculating demeanor. The guilt of knowing he helped cover up a murder weighs on him, but he's too invested in the lie to back out. He finds himself slipping into a spiral of self-loathing, torn between his own moral compass and his desire to protect himself and Anna. Ethan's relationship with Anna strains. The connection between Anna and Ethan starts to grow strained, as both struggle with the immense pressure of the cover-up. What was once a passionate affair built on secrecy now feels like a fragile, precarious alliance. They both know that their bond is built on a lie, a crime that could come crashing down at any moment. There's no trust between them anymore, only fear and desperation. Ethan begins to pull away, leaving Anna to face the consequences of their actions alone, even though she's still emotionally dependent on him, still in shock from the loss of her husband. There's sympathy at first, a sense that she must be suffering, that she's a victim of the tragedy as well. The gradual shift in perception. As the investigation unfolds, however, the public's perception of Anna begins to shift. Details of the affair between her and Ethan come to light, and whispers start to circulate about the nature of her marriage with Matthew. The once beloved figure of Anna Hale begins to look more like a woman caught in a web of lies and deceit. People who once saw her as a symbol of elegance and poise now see her as a woman capable of betrayal and violence. Media frenzy. The media dives deeper into Anna's life, sensationalizing every aspect of her past. The story of the affair with Ethan becomes a focal point in the coverage, and the details of the crime are dissected in public forums. Anna's every move is scrutinized, and she becomes a figure of both sympathy and disdain. The question of whether she acted in self-defense or out of cold-blooded rage becomes a central point of debate, with experts, armchair psychologists, and social commentators offering their opinions on her motives. The public judgment. Public opinion becomes polarized. Some see Anna as a victim of a controlling and abusive marriage, pushed to her breaking point. Others, however, see her as a manipulative woman who used the affair to escape a marriage she no longer wanted and then resorted to murder to cover her tracks. The outpouring of public judgment, both positive and negative, becomes impossible to avoid. Anna's once glamorous life now exists under a microscope, and the world she once inhabited no longer seems like her own. The investigation begins. The police begin to investigate Matthew's death, piecing together the evidence and speaking with those closest to him. Though Anna and Ethan manage to cover up the crime, cracks in their story begin to form. Suspicion mounts, especially as Anna's behavior grows more erratic. The presence of the affair, coupled with Anna's increasingly erratic emotional state, makes her a key focus in the investigation. There's an unease in the air, as she knows it's only a matter of time before the truth comes out. Legal counsel and denial. As the investigation heats up, Anna consults with lawyers, attempting to shield herself from the consequences of her actions. She tries to convince herself that she will be able to explain everything away, that the self-defense angle will hold up. She may have killed Matthew, but she still believes she can justify it to the authorities. Her legal team works tirelessly to protect her, but there's a growing realization that the evidence is not in her favor. No amount of money or influence will be able to save her if the truth comes to light. The realization of consequences. As the case moves closer to trial, Anna's world begins to unravel. The weight of her choices, both the affair and the murder, becomes undeniable. The trial looms, and she realizes that no matter what happens, her life will never be the same again. She's caught in a web of her own making, and there's no easy way out. The tone of the falling action is somber and reflective, delving into the emotional and psychological consequences of the crime. There's a sense of inevitability as Anna and Ethan struggle with their guilt, their paranoia, and the irreversible damage they've caused. The ripple effects of the crime are felt deeply, both in the personal lives of those involved and the broader community. The tension between self-preservation and the reality of their actions creates a somber, introspective atmosphere as the characters face the full weight of what they've done. Anna's legal fate. As the case moves through the courts, Anna's once gilded life comes crashing down. Despite the best efforts of her high-powered lawyers, the evidence against her becomes overwhelming. Her initial self-defense claim is dismissed, and though some aspects of her life are painted as tragic, the jury cannot ignore the brutal nature of the crime. She is found guilty of second-degree murder. The media circus surrounding the trial is relentless. The story of her affair, her manipulation, and her violent actions playing out in public for all to see. Sentencing and reflection. In a cold courtroom, Anna receives her sentence, 20 years to life in prison. It's a harsh sentence, but one that reflects the gravity of her crime. In the months leading up to her trial, Anna's emotional state deteriorates further. The realization that she's lost everything, her reputation, her freedom, and her former life, is too much to bear. While in prison, she reflects on the choices that led her here, but the regret that haunts her is not enough to undo what has been done. She writes letters to the family members of those who knew Matthew, trying to make amends, but the wounds she has inflicted are too deep. Anna's legal fate. As the case moves through the courts, Anna's once gilded life comes crashing down. Despite the best efforts of her high-powered lawyers, the evidence against her becomes overwhelming. Her initial self-defense claim is dismissed, and though some aspects of her life are painted as tragic, the jury cannot ignore the brutal nature of the crime. She is found guilty of second-degree murder. The media circus surrounding the trial is relentless. The story of her affair, her manipulation, and her violent actions playing out in public for all to see. Sentencing and reflection. In a cold courtroom, Anna receives her sentence, 20 years to life in prison. It's a harsh sentence, but one that reflects the gravity of her crime. In the months leading up to her trial, Anna's emotional state deteriorates further. The realization that she's lost everything, her reputation, her freedom, and her former life, is too much to bear. While in prison, she reflects on the choices that led her here. But the regret that haunts her is not enough to undo what has been done. She writes letters to the family members of those who knew Matthew, trying to make amends, but the wounds she has inflicted are too deep. Ethan's fate. Ethan, who was complicit in the cover-up, faces a far lighter punishment. His guilt, however, lingers with him in a way that feels more damning than any legal sentence could. After a lengthy investigation, he is granted immunity for his cooperation with the authorities, and though he is not charged for the murder, his reputation is forever tainted. Once a respected member of the community, Ethan becomes a shadow of his former self. He struggles to find work, and his relationships with friends and family break down. Though his freedom is intact, he's imprisoned by his own conscience, weighed down by the role he played in the tragedy. Public reaction. The public's response to the trial is divided. Many see Anna as a victim, someone who had been emotionally abused and controlled by Matthew for years. Her affair, the manipulation, and her emotional breakdowns evoke sympathy for her perceived plight. Others, however, see her as a murderer who took a man's life in cold blood. The media's portrayal of Anna shifts over time, from the sympathetic figure of the grieving widow to the cold, calculating woman who chose violence over reason. Ethan's role is largely ignored in the media, his complicity overshadowed by the larger narrative of Anna's crime. But for those who know him personally, his role in the crime can never be forgotten. The ripple effect, the fallout from the crime, doesn't stop with the arrest and trial. The lives of Anna's and Matthew's families are torn apart. Matthew's parents, once proud of their son's success, are left to mourn the loss of their child in a way that feels like betrayal. They never imagined that their son would be taken by someone so close, so trusted. Anna's family, once supportive of her marriage and high society life, feels deep shame for the woman she has become. Their relationships with Anna are permanently altered. Her mother, in particular, struggles with the horror of her daughter's actions, unable to reconcile the woman she raised with the woman who took a life. Discussion of power dynamics. The case exposes the darker sides of power dynamics in relationships, particularly the toxic control Matthew wielded over Anna. While some may have seen him as a successful and powerful man, his manipulation and emotional abuse created an environment where Anna felt trapped and powerless. The case becomes a conversation piece for discussions on emotional abuse, control, and the fragile nature of power within relationships. Many begin to question how we view power in partnerships, particularly when wealth and status obscure the reality of domestic abuse. Unpacking the golden cage of wealth. Anna's life was, in many ways, a golden cage. While she lived in luxury, attended social galas, and had the trappings of success, her marriage was one of isolation and control. This case highlights how wealth and status often mask deeper societal issues. It prompts questions about the pressures placed on individuals in high society circles, how appearances are maintained at the expense of personal well-being. Many wonder if Anna could have escaped the emotional abuse had she not been bound by the expectations of her privileged world. Others question the societal structures that allow such abuses to thrive under the surface, especially when wealth and power allow people to conceal darker aspects of their lives. Media's role in shaping perception. The media plays a significant role in the way Anna is perceived. Early reports focus on her as the beautiful, tragic widow, caught in the crossfire of an affair and a broken marriage. As the truth unfolds, The media switches gears, portraying her as a manipulative woman, someone who used her marriage to escape into an affair, then killed to cover up her secret. The case raises questions about the media's role in constructing narratives around criminal cases, how a person's reputation can be shaped by what the public is told, rather than the full reality of their lives. Anna's trial becomes a media spectacle, and the public, largely uninformed of the intimate details, forms their opinions based on headlines and sound bites. The complexity of human motivation. The case lays bare the complexities of human behavior, particularly in the realm of moral decision-making. Was Anna justified in her actions? Was she a victim of circumstance, pushed to the edge by years of emotional manipulation and control? Or was she a woman who simply made a choice, an immoral choice, to end a life to protect her own? The question of whether Anna was justified is one that lingers long after the trial ends. While some argue that she was merely a victim of her circumstances, others point to the coldness of her actions. The crime reveals how far a person can be pushed by their own emotional turmoil, but also how easily a sense of entitlement and privilege can shield someone from the full scope of their actions. Sokomaom. The illusion of control and power. Matthew's life was built around control. His business, his marriage, his wealth, all of it was designed to keep his world running the way he wanted it. But in the end, his control over Anna, the very thing that made him feel powerful, was his undoing. The case illustrates how power, when misused, can lead to destruction, both for the person wielding it and for those under its thumb. It also highlights how the desire for control, whether in relationships, business, or life, can have deadly consequences. Anna's own desperation to regain control over her life after years of feeling powerless leads her down a dark path, and in doing so, she sacrifices her own humanity in the process. Morality and the consequences of choice. The story forces a confrontation with the idea of choice, how we are defined by the decisions we make, even when faced with impossible circumstances. Anna's descent into violence can be seen as a culmination of her internal battle between right and wrong, self-preservation and justice. Her story raises difficult questions about morality. Can we ever truly escape the consequences of our choices, even when we are acting out of perceived necessity? When does survival become justification for murder? The final resolution to her case suggests that morality is often more complex than a simple dichotomy of good and bad. Each action is colored by 1,000 shades of gray. The enduring legacy of violence. While the legal outcomes bring some resolution, the emotional scars left by the crime linger. The personal loss for Anna, Ethan, and the families involved is permanent. They are all marked by the crime in different ways, and though Anna's story may come to an end in the courtroom, the consequences of her actions will continue to echo throughout the lives of everyone involved. The crime reveals how violence, once introduced into a relationship, has a way of reverberating long after the initial act. It doesn't just destroy the victim, it destroys everyone around it, and even those who are complicit in covering it up. The legacy of Anna's choice will forever define her. The tone of the conclusion is somber and reflective, emphasizing the complexities of morality, human behavior, and the consequences of choice. It explores the themes of power dynamics, control, and the limitations of justice in addressing deeper emotional truths. The final moments provide a sense of resolution in terms of legal outcomes, but leave lingering questions about the character's inner transformations and the broader implications for society. The story closes on a note of contemplation, inviting readers to reflect on the intricacies of human nature and the moral gray areas that define our actions.